David had never imagined his life would unravel like this. A quiet evening at home turned into an unforgettable nightmare. After a long day at the office, he returned to his small suburban house in America, expecting to see his daughter, Masha, preparing for the evening with friends, as she had mentioned earlier that day. But when he stepped through the door, all was eerily silent. "Masha?" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty house. No response. He scanned the living room and then the front yard. Her car was parked outside. So where was she? Had she gone somewhere without telling him? His concern quickly turned to panic. He hurried upstairs, rushing toward Masha's room, but the door stood wide open, and there was no sign of her. A sinking feeling in his chest, David's eyes darted around the room. His gaze landed on the bathroom door, slightly ajar. He moved toward it, his heart pounding harder with each step. When he opened the door, what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. There, in the bathtub, lay Masha. Her once bright face was now pale, her arms marred by deep cuts. She had taken her own life. The sight was so chilling that it left David frozen, unable to move, his world crashing down in an instant. From that moment on, David's life spiraled into a dark, terrifying abyss. Nightmares plagued him, each one more vivid and distressing than the last. He would wake up drenched in sweat, his heart racing, unsure of what was real and what was just another cruel dream. During the day, strange occurrences began to unfold around him. Shadows flickered at the corners of his vision, figures that disappeared the moment he tried to focus on them. But the most unsettling experience was when, one night, David felt Masha's presence so strongly that he could almost hear her breathing behind him. When he turned around, there was no one there. 4 months passed, yet David's grief and confusion seemed to grow with each day. One evening, barely holding on to his sanity, he attended a support group for people dealing with loss. He was desperate for relief, for someone to understand the depth of his pain. When it was his turn to speak, he stood before the group, his voice trembling. "4 months ago, my daughter took her own life, and just a month ago, my wife left me. Now I have nothing left to live for." His words hung in the air, heavy with sorrow. As he spoke, he noticed 4 women in black sitting quietly in the back of the room. Their gaze was unsettling, as though they were looking straight through him, peeling away the layers of his soul. But David couldn't bring himself to care. He was lost in his grief, overwhelmed by the void that had opened inside him. It was then that the women spoke. "We can help you," they said softly, their voices laced with an eerie calm. "We can help you speak to Masha." David was skeptical, but when they uttered his daughter's name, Masha, his heart skipped a beat. How did they know her name? He had never told anyone, not even in this support group. The women seemed to sense his doubt, and one of them added, "We can hear the voice of people's hearts. If you are ready, come to us." David, torn between hope and fear, found himself unable to resist. He didn't believe in the supernatural, but the idea of speaking to Masha, even if it was just one last time, filled him with a strange sense of longing. The next day, his reality began to blur even further. He began to experience physical sensations he couldn't explain. His palms felt numb, and the air around him grew heavy with a strange energy. And then, as if summoned by the very thoughts that had consumed him, a voice echoed through the house. It was faint, but unmistakable. He followed the voice upstairs to Masha's room, where he found his ex-wife, Michelle, packing her things. It seemed like she was leaving again. Confused and desperate, David tried to hold on to the fragments of his family, but Michelle's anger and bitterness toward him only grew. He had failed her. He had failed Masha. That night, David felt as though his body was being paralyzed by an unseen force. He could hear whispers in the house, faint and indistinct. The air was thick with tension as he walked toward Masha's room. When he entered, he felt the sudden and unmistakable sensation of someone standing behind him. But when he turned around, there was no one there. His heart pounded in his chest as his eyes swept over Masha's things. He couldn't stop himself from looking through her personal belongings. That's when he found her diary. Flipping through its pages, David discovered something that made his blood run cold. In the photographs, Masha was pictured with 4 women, the same women he had seen in the support group, but their faces were blurry, like they had been deliberately obscured. As he read further, David was horrified to realize that Masha's life had been filled with questions, fears, and secrets she had never shared with him. She had been in turmoil long before that fateful night in the bathroom. The very next day, David felt compelled to examine the diary again. As he flipped through the pages, he found something else, an undergarment that didn't belong to him or Michelle. It was an eerie discovery that filled him with a deep sense of unease. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Masha. She was standing at the top of the stairs, staring at him, her face hollow with emptiness. David's voice cracked as he softly called out her name, but Masha didn't respond. She simply turned and walked up the stairs, disappearing into the shadows. The next few days were a blur of nightmares and strange occurrences. David couldn't escape the feeling that Masha's spirit was haunting him, tormenting him from beyond the grave. He was trapped in a cycle of terror and sorrow, unable to break free. And then, when David met Masha's old friend Casey and showed her the photo of the 4 women, Casey's reaction was one of confusion. She didn't recognize them. That's when David realized something was terribly wrong. By now, David's grip on reality was slipping, but the strange women in black hadn't gone away. They reappeared in his life, claiming that a dark spirit was trapped in his house and that it needed to be exorcised. David, desperate for answers, allowed them to perform a purification ritual. As they chanted in eerie, unfamiliar languages, David's mind raced. But when his ex-wife, Michelle, arrived and saw the women in his home, she exploded in anger, accusing him of bringing them in for his own purposes. David tried to explain, but Michelle refused to listen and stormed out. The women told him that the ritual wasn't complete. They warned him that Masha's spirit would not be at peace until he uncovered the truth of why she was still here. David, now more confused than ever, was left with a final warning. He must uncover the truth. But how could he do that when his own mind was being consumed by the fear of what he might uncover? The only thing left was the truth Masha had hidden away in her diary and in the blurry faces of those 4 mysterious women. David could no longer distinguish reality from nightmare. The sense of dread that had plagued him ever since Masha's death now felt like an inescapable shroud, wrapping around him tighter with every passing day. His mind had deteriorated from the relentless horror of what he had witnessed. His desperation grew, pushing him toward the idea of contacting Masha through any means possible, even if it meant descending into the very darkness he had once feared. One night, driven by the agony of losing his daughter and the overwhelming need to communicate with her, David decided to take matters into his own hands. Armed with the diary and a strange, irrational hope, he began to chant the words he had found within its pages, hoping to break the barriers between the living and the dead. As he recited the mantra, the atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension. The walls seemed to close in, and David could feel his heart hammering in his chest. But it wasn't just fear anymore, it was anticipation. And then, everything shifted. A cold gust of wind swept through the house, extinguishing every light in the room, plunging him into darkness. David collapsed to the floor, his body racked with an overwhelming sensation of vertigo. He heard strange, echoing sounds, like whispers coming from all around him. When he regained his senses, he opened his eyes to find himself in a place that felt entirely alien, a twisted version of reality.
In this strange world, 4 women stood in front of him, their faces clearer than ever before. The same 4 women who had appeared at the support group, the same ones who had claimed to be able to help him connect with Masha. But something had changed. As they stood there, their faces seemed to shift and distort, almost as if their true forms were being revealed. It was then that David realized the horrifying truth. The women were no longer separate beings. They were one. The leader of the group, her voice low and trembling with power, told him, "To summon your daughter's spirit, you must bring her most cherished belongings, the things she held dear, her diary, the things that bound her to this world." The ritual began, but as they recited the words, the atmosphere turned from strange to overwhelmingly sinister. The women's bodies began to shake violently, their faces contorting in pain. Then, one by one, they collapsed, their bodies jerking unnaturally, as if they were being torn apart from the inside. David, terrified, watched in horror as the ritual continued to unfold, but not in the way he had hoped. The women's twisted forms writhed on the floor, their screams echoing in his ears. He could feel the temperature drop drastically, the air thick with malevolent energy. As he looked at the photo of Masha and the women, where their faces were once blurry, David saw them clearly for the first time. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. The women in the photograph were the same as the ones standing before him, but they were not what they appeared to be. They were something darker, something much more powerful and dangerous. Fear clawed at David's insides as he tried to make sense of what was happening. But the leader of the group spoke again, her voice now distorted, as though coming from deep within a void. "Your daughter's spirit is bound to this place, and now so are you." The words struck him with such force that David stumbled back, his mind spinning in disbelief. He couldn't escape, there was no way out. And just as quickly as they had arrived, the women disappeared into the ether, leaving David alone with the overwhelming knowledge that he had unknowingly walked into a trap. Desperate, David returned to his home, still reeling from the strange encounter. As he stepped inside, the eerie silence of the house enveloped him once more. But this time, he wasn't alone. He could feel it, the presence. Masha's spirit was near. He followed the faint sound of crying, his heart racing, and found himself in the bathroom, the very room where it all began. David was paralyzed with fear as he saw Masha's ghostly figure standing in front of him. Her face was twisted in torment, her eyes hollow with pain. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I'm so lonely." David's heart shattered at the sight of his daughter, and for a moment he was consumed with a deep, unexplainable sorrow. He reached out to her, but the moment he touched her, the world around him shattered once again. Everything went black, and David fell to his knees. The haunting voices, the strange occurrences, the whispers from the other side, it was all real. Masha's spirit had never truly left, but now something darker had taken over her. She was no longer the daughter he had known, but a vessel for something far more sinister. As David wandered through the house, his thoughts racing and his mind unraveling, he suddenly felt the presence of someone, or something, standing behind him. He spun around to find himself face to face with the four mysterious women, their eyes empty and soulless. The leader of the group stepped forward, her voice cold and emotionless. "You cannot escape. The darkness is now in you." David recoiled, fear gripping his heart. But before he could react, he was pulled back into the strange realm where the women began their final, horrifying chant. In that moment, David knew there was no turning back. The truth had finally been revealed. The four women were not just strangers. They were the force that had been controlling Masha's fate all along. They were the ones who had pushed her to the edge, the ones who had manipulated her life and ultimately her death. As David's body began to tremble, his mind fractured beyond repair, he knew that Masha's death had been the beginning of a far darker journey, a journey that would cost him everything. And when the last chant was uttered, everything went silent. David's world crumbled, his soul consumed by the darkness.